Chapter 3, in which Cimorene meets a witch and has doubts about a wizard. Therandro left, but he came back again the next day and the day after that. It got so that Cimorene could not even step outside the cave without running into him. She might have been flattered if it hadn't been so obvious that Therandro was only worried about how foolish he'd look if he went home without fighting the dragon. On his fifth visit, Cimorene was very sharp with him, and when he had not returned by mid-afternoon of the next day, she had began to hope that he'd finally left for good. Cimorene was in the kitchen, taking the pits out of cherries when she heard someone knocking at the mouth of the cave. "Go away," she shouted in complete exasperation. "I told you and I told you. I don't want to be rescued, and I'm not going to argue with you anymore." "I didn't come here to argue," said a no-nonsense female voice from outside. "I came to meet the person who's been borrowing my crepe pan. It's not something there's normally much call for." "Oh dear," said Cimorene. She wiped her hands hastily on a corner of her apron and hurried out to greet her visitor. "I'm sorry," she said, coming around the gray rock at the cave mouth, "but I've having a problem with nights lately, and I thought—" She stopped short when she got a good look at her caller for the first time. The woman standing outside the cave was considerably shorter than Cimorene. Her ginger hair was piled in waves on top of her head. She had on a loose black robe with long sleeves, which she wore unbelted. A small pair of glasses with rectangular lenses sat firmly on her nose, and she carried an extremely twiggy broom in her left hand. Despite her unusual appearance, she projected an air of great self-assurance. "I quite understand," she said, studying Cimorene shrewdly. "You must be Kazul's new princess." "Yes, I'm Cimorene, and you are—" "Morwen," said the black-robed woman, leaning the broom against the rock. "Kazul and I have been friends for a long time, ever since I moved to the Enchanted Forest, so I thought I'd come and have a look at her new princess." "You're the person Kazul's been borrowing dishes from, aren't you?" Cimorene said, and blinked. "But then you must be—" "A witch," Morwen finished. "I don't see why you find it surprising. It's not exactly an unusual profession in these parts." "It's just that I haven't met one before," Cimorene said, not mentioning the fact that Linderwall witches were considered dangerous and probably evil, and were therefore avoided if at all possible. But then, people in Linderwall didn't like dragons much either. "Won't you come in and have some tea?" "I certainly will," said the witch, and she did. She prowled around like a nervous cat, while Cimorene put the kettle on the stove and got out the tea things. "Well," said Morwen approvingly, as Cimorene filled the teapot, "you're the first princess I've ever met who has sense to keep up with the kitchen." Cimorene decided that she liked Morwen's down-to-earth manner. She soon found herself telling Morwen everything, from the fencing and the philosophy and Latin lessons to the seemingly endless stream of nights. The story lasted through 2 cups of tea and finished with Therandro's stubborn insistence on rescuing her. "That is absurd," Morwen said decidedly when Cimorene finished. "If this continues, you'll never get anything done." "I know," Cimorene said. "I keep telling them I don't want to be rescued, but they're all so honorable that none of them will tell anyone when they go back because they think it would be gossiping. More likely they don't want to look foolish. Maybe, but even if they did tell people, I'm not sure anyone would believe it. I have a hard enough time convincing knights when they show up in person." "It's just as well that your visitors have been honorable," Morwen said, looking thoughtful. "Linderwall's a prosperous kingdom. Sooner or later, the chance of getting hold of half of it is going to tempt someone to try and rescue you, whether you want to be rescued or not." "That hadn't occurred to me," Cimorene said, with a worried frown. "What can I do about it?" "I'm not sure," Morwen replied. "The situation's not at all usual, you know. I've never heard of a princess volunteering for a dragon before, which rather surprises me now that I think about it. A dragon's princess is practically guaranteed a good marriage, so you'd think princesses from the smaller kingdoms would be clamoring for the job." "They're probably worried about being eaten," Cimorene said. "Do you think it would help if I sent my parents a letter?" Probably not," Morwen said, after a moment's consideration. "But it can't hurt to try. I'll check my spell books when I get home. It may give me an idea. I suggest that you hunt through Kazula's library. She's been collecting scrolls for centuries. You ought to be able to find something useful. Meanwhile, we'll put up a sign. A sign? Cimorene stared at Morwen for a moment, and then began to smile. Road washed out, she said. Use alternate route. Is that the kind of sign you were thinking of? Exactly, said Morwen with approval. It won't stop anyone who's really determined, but it will certainly slow them down. That should give us time to come up with something better. The two women set to work at once, and in a short time produced a large, official-looking sign. Morwen offered to set it up on her way back to the enchanted forest, but Cimorene thought it would be too awkward for her to carry while riding the broom. So once Morwen had gone, Cimorene tucked the sign under her arm and started down the path. Cimorene had not had a chance to do any real exploring before, though she had looked out at the mountains every day and wondered. She was happy to have an excuse to see more out of the outside of her new home. It was a lovely day, warm and sunny, and at first the path was level and easy. Cimorene was just beginning to wonder whether anyone would believe her sign once she put it up, when the path swung left around a boulder and narrowed to a tiny ledge that sloped steeply upward. Cimorene stopped. Now she knew why none of the knights had ridden up to the cave. The ledge was barely wide enough for a person on foot to edge along sideways. The best rider in the world couldn't have gotten a horse down it. Cimorene rolled her sign up in a firm, tight cylinder and struck it through her belt so she would have her hands free while she climbed. Then she stepped out onto the ledge. Sliding up the slope took a long time, for Cimorene was careful to make sure that each part of the ledge would hold before she trusted her weight on it. She was also careful not to look down. Heights had never bothered her before, but there was a big difference between standing solidly on top of a tower in Linderwall Castle, behind a 4-foot parapet, and inching along a barely 6 inches wide, with nothing in between her and nothing. She had almost reached the top of the slope, where the path widened again, when a portion of the ledge disappeared just ahead of her. Cimorene pulled her foot back and tried to figure out what had happened. She hadn't seen or heard the rock crumble and fall away. There was just simply a 2-foot gap in the ledge that hadn't been there before. She studied it for a moment, trying to think of a way of getting past. Nothing occurred to her. She felt a twinge of annoyance at the thought of all of her wasted efforts, but cheered up at once when she realized it would solve the problem of the visiting knights. If she couldn't get around or over the gap, an armored knight wouldn't be able to get by either. Cimorene smiled and turned her head to creep back to safety. There was another 2-foot gap on the ledge on her other side. Cimorene frowned. Something very odd was going on, and she didn't like it. "You look like you're in need of assistance," said a deep voice from above her. "May I be of help?" Cimorene turned her head and saw a man standing 4 feet away on the path at the top of the ledge. He was tall and sharp-featured, and his eyes were hard, bright black. Though he had a gray beard that reached nearly to his waist, his face did not look old. He wore loose robes made of blue and gray silk, and in one hand he held a staff as tall as himself, made of dark, polished wood. "Possibly," Cimorene answered. She was certain that the man was a wizard, though she had never met one before, and she did not want to agree to anything until she was sure what she was agreeing to. The court philosopher had always claimed that wizards were very tricky. "May I know to whom I am speaking?" "I am the wizard Zenmar," the man said, "and you must be Kazul's new princess. I hope you're not trying to run away. It's not done," Cimorene said, feeling particularly annoyed because for once she was not doing anything improper. "Yes, I am Cimorene. I was going to say that it isn't wise to run away from your dragon," the wizard corrected mildly. "I believe it's done all the time." "I'm sorry," Cimorene said, but she didn't try to explain. "And I'm not running away. How did you know who I was?" "It seems unlikely that I would find any other charming young lady walking so casually through this pass of silver ice," Zenmar explained. He smiled. As you see, it is easy to find oneself in difficulties if one is not properly prepared. Cimorene decided she did not like him. He reminded her of one of her father's courtiers, a humorless, sneaky little man who had paid her compliments only when he was after something and who couldn't resist giving advice when nobody wanted it. The ledge was all here when I started, she said. An idea crossed her mind, and she looked hard at Zenmar. I don't suppose you know what happened to the two missing bits? A flash of startled annoyance crossed the wizard's face, and then his expression smoothed back into a pleasant politeness. He shrugged. The pass of silver ice is a strange place. Odd things frequently occur. Not like this, Cimorene muttered. She was sure, now, that the wizard had made the ledge vanish so that he could pretend to rescue her, but she had no idea why he would want her to think that she owed him a favor. Actually, it surprised her that he had destroyed the ledge. She didn't think the dragons would be too happy when they found out, unless he hadn't really destroyed it. What did you say? Zenmar said, frowning uncertainly. Cimorene ignored him. Without looking down, she slid her right foot along the ledge. The rock felt firm and solid. Slowly, she transferred her weight and brought her left foot up beside her right. She shifted again, still careful not to look down, and slid her right foot forward once again. What are you doing? Zenmar demanded. Getting off this ledge, Cimorene replied. I should think that was obvious. One more step would bring her to the path, but Zenmar was squarely in her way. Would you mind moving back a little so I have somewhere to stand? Zenmar's eyes narrowed, but he backed up several paces, and Cimorene stepped into the path. She wanted to heave a sigh of relief, but she did not. She was not going to let Zenmar have the satisfaction of knowing she had been worried. Instead, she gave him her best royal smile and said with polite insincerity, Thank you for offering to help, but as you see, it wasn't needed. Do stop by and visit sometime. I will, said Zenmar, as if he meant it. A very good day to you, Princess Cimorene. With that, he vanished. There was no smoke or fire or whirlwind. There wasn't even a shimmer in the air as he disappeared. He was simply and suddenly gone. Cimorene stared at the place where the wizard had been and felt a shiver run down her spine. It took a very powerful wizard indeed to vanish so quietly, and she still didn't know what he wanted. She shook herself and started down the path. She would worry about the wizard later. Right now she had to find a place to put up her sign so that she could get back to the cave. She didn't feel like exploring anymore. She hadn't taken more than 2 or 3 steps when a dark shadow passed over her. Looking up, startled, she saw a flash of yellow-green scales. An instant later, a dragon landed on the path in front of her, blocking the way completely. His tail hung over the edge, and he had to keep his wings partly unfurled in order to stay in balance. Cimorene recognized him at once. It was the yellow-green dragon who had wanted to eat her the day she arrived, so unexpectedly in the dragon's cave. I saw the whole thing, the dragon said, with a nasty, triumphant glee. Running away and talking to a wizard. Just wait until Kazul hears. She'll be sorry she didn't just let you eat you and be done with it. I offer you greetings and good fortune on your travels, Cimorene said, figuring that it was the best to be polite to anyone as large and toothy as a dragon, even if he wasn't being polite to her at all. I'm not running away. Then what are you doing? Kazul doesn't have any business that would bring you down this side of the path. I came out here to put a sign to keep the knights away, Cimorene said. That's ridiculous, the dragon sniffed. I've been on patrol of these part of the mountains for the past week, and I haven't seen or smelled even a hint of night. Then you haven't been by Kazul's cave, Cimorene said. At least 9 of them have shown up there in the past week, although for the past couple of days it's been mostly a prince. Princes don't smell any different from knights, and I have noticed if any of them were hanging around, the dragon said flatly. And what about that wizard you were talking to? Charge! Shouted a familiar voice from the other side of the dragon. Therendril, Cimorene shouted, I told you to go away. The yellow-green dragon twisted his long neck and glanced back over his shoulder. He seemed to bunch together like a cat crouching. Then he sprang straight up in the air, and Cimorene was blinded by the cloud of dust raised by the flapping of his enormous wings. She had the presence of mind to flatten herself back against the rocks by the side of the path, and a moment later she heard someone blundering by. She stuck out a foot. "Ow!" she said, as Thorindel fell over with a clatter. She'd forgotten that he'd been wearing iron boots along with the rest of his armor. "Cimorene, is that you?" Thorindel said. "Of course it's me," Cimorene replied, rubbing her ankle. "Open your eyes, the dust is settled." She looked up as she spoke and saw the dragon soar out of sight beyond a cliff. "I'm sorry," Thorindel said, and then in an anxious tone he added, "I hope I didn't hurt you, stumbling into you like that." Cimorene started to say that it was nothing, that it had been her fault anyways, when she suddenly got a much better idea. "I think you've sprained my ankle," she declared. "Oh no," Thorindel said. He sounded truly dismayed, though Cimorene couldn't see his face because he was wearing his helmet with the visor down. "I probably won't be able to walk for at least a month," she declared, "and there's certainly no way I could climb down this mountain." "But if you can't walk," Thorindel said, and paused. Then he squared his shoulders and went on, "Then I suppose I'll have to carry you." He didn't sound as if he liked the idea. "I don't think that would work very well," Cimorene said quickly. "How will you fight when all the dragons come back and you're carrying me? No, you'll have to leave me here and go back alone." "You can't stay here," Thorindel protested, although Cimorene's talk of when all the dragons come back had plainly made him nervous. "I have to," Cimorene said, trying to sound noble and long-suffering. "The dragons will make sure I get back safely to Kazul's cave, and a month isn't too long a wait after all." "I don't understand," Thorindel said, and he did look thoroughly puzzled. "But there's no point in you or anyone else coming up here to rescue me for at least a month. Not till my ankle's better," Cimorene explained patiently. "Oh, I see," Thorindel said. He tilted his head back and scanned the empty sky. "You're quite sure you'll be all right? Then I'll just be along before these dragons return." He turned and started down the path as quickly as he could manage in full armor.